Nathan Hale wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand, squinting at the blazing afternoon sun. His hands, calloused from years of hard work, gripped the worn handle of his hammer as he finished repairing a loose step on his tiny rental home's porch. It wasn't much, but it was home for now, at least. Rent was overdue again, and the landlord wasn't exactly patient. "Daddy, I'm hungry," a small voice piped up from the doorway. Nathan turned to see his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, watching him with wide, expectant eyes. Her blonde hair was tangled from playing outside, and her little hands clutched the hem of her oversized t-shirt, a hand-me-down from a neighbor. "I know, sweetheart," Nathan said, forcing a reassuring smile. "I'll fix us something soon, okay?" She nodded, trusting him completely, even though there wasn't much left in the fridge. He had been stretching every dollar, but with work slowing down, money was tighter than ever. As he set his hammer down, the sound of a car door shutting nearby caught his attention. He looked up to see an elderly woman standing by the broken fence of the house next door. She was dressed neatly, her silver hair pinned back in a careful bun, and she had a graceful air about her. Her house was well kept, except for that fence it was leaning precariously, some boards missing entirely. Nathan had noticed it before but never gave it much thought. Now, the woman was frowning at it, her hands resting on her hips. "Afternoon, ma'am," Nathan called out, walking over. She turned her sharp, blue eyes toward him and sighed. "Afternoon, young man. This fence is an absolute disaster. I don't even know where to start fixing it." Nathan studied the damage. "It's not in great shape, but it's fixable. You just need the right tools and materials." The woman let out a dry chuckle. "That would help, wouldn't it? Problem is, I don't know a single reliable company to call. I keep hearing about people getting scammed, and I don't want to deal with that nonsense." Nathan hesitated. He wasn't one to stick his nose in other people's business, but he knew how to fix fences. He had done plenty of handyman work before. "I could do it for you," he offered. "I've got the tools, and I know what I'm doing." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Do you now? And what would you charge for that?" Nathan glanced at Lily, who was now watching from their porch. Truthfully, he could use the money, but something about asking this elderly woman for payment felt wrong. "I'll do it for free," he said. Her eyebrows shot up. "For free? Now why on earth would you do that?" Nathan shrugged. "You're my neighbor. It's the right thing to do." The woman studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Well, aren't you something? I suppose I should introduce myself, Sylvia Lancaster." She extended a delicate hand. "Nathan Hale," he said, shaking it, "and that little one over there is my daughter, Lily." Sylvia glanced at Lily and gave a small smile. "Lovely girl." She turned back to Nathan. "If you're serious about this, I won't stop you. I suppose I've been putting it off long enough." Nathan nodded. "I'll start tomorrow morning. Shouldn't take more than a couple of days." Sylvia gave him an approving look before heading back inside, leaving Nathan standing by the broken fence. As he walked back to his own house, Lily tugged at his shirt. "Daddy, why are you fixing her fence for free?" Nathan knelt down beside her. "Because sometimes, Lily, doing the right thing doesn't need a price tag." She tilted her head, thinking it over, then she nodded. "Okay." Nathan ruffled her hair. "Now, let's see what we can make for dinner." That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had no idea how he was going to pay rent, but for now, he had a job to do. And for some reason, that made him feel a little better. The next morning, Nathan was up early, gathering his tools. He had salvaged some nails and a few planks from past projects, but the fence needed more than he had. He'd have to figure that out as he went. Lily sat on the porch, swinging her legs as she watched him. "Are you going to fix it all today?" she asked. "Not all of it," Nathan replied, "but I'll get started." He made his way to Sylvia's yard, where she was already outside, dressed in a simple, elegant blouse and slacks, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup. She observed as Nathan inspected the fence more closely. "Morning," she greeted. "Morning," he replied, running his fingers over the splintered wood. "It's in worse shape than I thought. Some of these boards are completely rotted through, but I'll make it work." Sylvia took a slow sip of her tea. "You sound confident." Nathan shrugged. "It's what I do." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Well, I won't hover. Let me know if you need anything." Nathan got to work, removing the worst boards first. Hours passed as he focused, sweat dripping down his neck. His hands moved with practiced skill, carefully measuring and securing each replacement. He had always found comfort in physical labor. It was honest, straightforward. At midday, Sylvia reappeared with a tray. "You should eat," she said, setting it on a small table nearby. Nathan glanced at the neatly arranged sandwiches and a cool glass of lemonade. "I appreciate it," he said, realizing how hungry he was. Sylvia sat down across from him. "So, Nathan, tell me, what do you do when you're not fixing fences for free?" He hesitated, chewing his bite slowly. "Odd jobs, construction when I can get it, handiwork here and there." She nodded, as if filing the information away. "And your wife?" Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "She passed a few years ago. It's just me and Lily now." Sylvia's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Nathan gave a small nod. "It's been tough, but we get by." She was quiet for a moment before changing the subject. "You're good with your hands. I can tell this isn't just a hobby." "I've always liked building," Nathan admitted. "Used to dream about running my own company one day, but life had other plans." Sylvia tapped her fingers against the table thoughtfully. "Life does have a way of surprising us." He finished his food and stood. "Thank you for the lunch. I should get back to work." She nodded, watching as he returned to the fence. By evening, Nathan had made significant progress. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stepping back to examine the day's work. Sylvia approached, inspecting the repairs. "Impressive," she said. "It'll hold up for a long time once it's done," Nathan assured her. She nodded approvingly. "I believe you." As Nathan packed up his tools, Sylvia glanced over at Lily, who had wandered into the yard, watching butterflies flit through the air. "She's a good girl," she remarked. "She is," Nathan agreed. Sylvia's gaze lingered on Lily for a moment before she turned back to Nathan. "Appreciate what you're doing." "It's no trouble," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "Even though you could use the money." Nathan hesitated, but didn't deny it. "Some things are worth doing just because they need to be done." Sylvia studied him again, then smiled faintly. "I'll see you tomorrow, Nathan." He nodded, picking up his tools and calling for Lily. As they walked back to their house, he felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't sure why, but something about Sylvia Lancaster made him feel like this fence wasn't the only thing being repaired. The next morning, Nathan woke before the sun had fully risen, his body aching slightly from the previous day's labor. He moved quietly through the small house, careful not to wake Lily as he dressed in his worn work jeans and an old t-shirt. The thought of finishing Sylvia's fence gave him a strange sense of purpose, something solid in a life that often felt uncertain. By the time he stepped outside, the air was already warming. He grabbed his toolbox and made his way next door, where Sylvia was already outside, tending to a small flower bed near the porch. She glanced up as he approached, her sharp blue eyes taking him in. "You're early," she observed. "Figured I'd get a head start," Nathan replied, setting his tools down near the fence. She nodded approvingly. "Admire a man who values his time." Nathan didn't respond, instead running his hands over the wooden planks he had installed the day before, checking for any flaws. He worked steadily, lost in the rhythm of measuring, cutting, and securing the boards. Around midday, Sylvia reappeared, carrying a glass of iced tea. She set it on a small table near where he worked. "You're moving fast." Nathan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I want to make sure it's done right." She studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Nathan glanced at her. "Who's that?" "My late husband," she said, a distant look in her eyes. "He built things too, not with his hands but with his mind. He started with nothing and made something of himself." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "What did he do?" Sylvia let out a quiet breath. "He was in real estate. He built a small empire, piece by piece. I was there through all of it, watching him turn empty land into something meaningful." Nathan took a sip of the iced tea, feeling its coolness soothe the dryness in his throat. "Sounds like he worked hard for it." "He did," Sylvia agreed, "but he never forgot where he came from. That was the key." Nathan nodded, understanding the sentiment. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she said simply, "and he would have liked you." Nathan wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he focused on his work. The afternoon stretched on, the sun dipping lower in the sky as he continued. He had underestimated how much work the fence truly needed, but he was determined to see it through. As he hammered in another nail, he heard the sound of a car pulling into Sylvia's driveway. He glanced up to see a sleek black sedan, the kind of car that didn't belong in their quiet neighborhood. A well-dressed man stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket before making his way toward the house. Sylvia, who had been sitting on the porch, stood as the man approached. "Mr. Calloway," she greeted. "Mrs. Lancaster," he said, extending a hand. "It's good to see you again." Nathan continued working, but he couldn't help but overhear their conversation. "Have you given any more thought to my previous offer?" the man asked. Sylvia's expression remained unreadable. "I have, and my answer is still the same." Mr. Calloway sighed, glancing at the house. "It's a generous offer. You could be rid of this place and all the headaches that come with it." Sylvia's voice was firm. "This house is not a headache, Mr. Calloway, it is my home." The man hesitated before nodding. "Understand, if you change your mind, the offer stands." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, driving off without another word. Nathan set his hammer down, curiosity getting the better of him. Who was that? Sylvia exhaled slowly. A man who doesn't understand that not everything in life is about money. Nathan frowned. "He was trying to buy your house." She nodded. "And the land it sits on. Developers want to turn this area into something else, something shinier, something new." "And you're not interested." Sylvia gave him a pointed look. "This house holds memories. I have no interest in selling it to people who see it as nothing more than an investment." Nathan respected that. He had moved so many times in his life that he had never truly been able to plant roots anywhere. If he had a place like this, he wasn't sure he'd want to let it go either. They fell into a comfortable silence as Nathan continued working. By the time the sun had fully set, the fence was nearly complete. He stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying his work. Sylvia, who had been watching from the porch, gave a small nod. "It looks good." "It'll hold up for a long time," Nathan said. She folded her hands in front of her. "I appreciate the work you've done, more than you know." Nathan gave a small nod, gathering his tools. "I'll come back tomorrow to finish up." As he walked back toward his house, he felt a strange sense of accomplishment. He had spent the past few years barely scraping by, moving from one job to the next, never feeling like he was building anything lasting. But this felt different. And he had no idea that his act of kindness was about to change everything. The next morning, Nathan headed back to Sylvia's house with a sense of finality. Today, he would finish the fence. He had spent the past few days pouring his time and effort into repairing it, and though his own troubles still loomed, he felt a deep satisfaction in knowing he had helped someone who needed it. Sylvia was already outside when he arrived, standing near the fence with her arms crossed. She watched him approach with an unreadable expression. "You're a man of your word," she observed. "I try to be," Nathan replied as he set his toolbox down. He wasted no time getting to work, securing the last few boards and making sure everything was sturdy. Each hammer strike echoed through the quiet neighborhood, a rhythmic sound that felt oddly reassuring. The morning air was warm, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint aroma of the tea Sylvia had been drinking. As he worked, Lily appeared in the yard, her bare feet padding over the grass. She had taken to spending time at Sylvia's house while Nathan worked, often sitting quietly on the porch with a book or playing with the stray cat that sometimes wandered by. Today, she was drawing with a stick in the dirt, scribbling shapes and lines that only made sense to her. Sylvia glanced at her before turning her attention back to Nathan. "You've done a fine job," she said. "Thank you," he said, stepping back to assess his work. Sylvia nodded in approval, her lips pressed together as if she were deep in thought. Then, without preamble, she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small envelope. Nathan barely noticed at first, still focused on the fence, but when she extended it toward him, he hesitated. "What's this?" he asked. Sylvia's expression remained calm. "A thank you," she said simply. Nathan frowned. He hadn't done this expecting anything in return. The idea of taking money from her didn't sit right with him. "I told you I wasn't charging you for this," he said. "And I heard you," Sylvia replied, "but I have a habit of showing gratitude in my own way." Nathan sighed, wiping his hands on his jeans before reluctantly taking the envelope. It was heavier than he expected. He opened it cautiously, his eyes widening as he saw the thick stack of bills inside. He thumbed through them, his mind struggling to process the amount. It wasn't just a few $100s. It was far more than that. "This is," Nathan started, but Sylvia cut him off. $15,000, she said, watching him closely. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. "Sylvia, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," she said firmly, "and you will." He shook his head, still stunned. "This is too much." Sylvia met his gaze with a quiet intensity. "Do you know why I never got this fence fixed before?" she asked. Nathan hesitated, still thrown off by the money in his hands. "You said you didn't know who to trust." "That's part of it," she admitted. "But the truth is, I was waiting for the right person. Someone who wouldn't see me as just another paycheck." Nathan swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Sylvia continued, her voice steady. "I've lived a long time, Nathan, and I've seen people take shortcuts, cheat others, and put money above everything else. But you did this because it was the right thing to do. You remind me of the kind of man my husband was." Nathan clenched his jaw, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He had spent so long struggling, barely making ends meet, and now here was this woman, his neighbor, offering him something that could change his life. Sylvia sighed, as if sensing his hesitation. "Let me tell you something," she said. "My husband built a fortune in real estate, and when he passed, he left it all to me. I don't talk about it because it doesn't define me. I still live in this house because it's my home, not because I have to. I could have called any company to fix this fence, but I didn't, and now I know why." Nathan stared at her, speechless. "I have more money than I'll ever need," Sylvia continued. "But what I don't have is people like you in my life, people who do good simply because they believe in it. This isn't charity, Nathan. This is my way of telling you that the world needs more people like you, and if I can help you get back on your feet, then I will." Nathan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He looked down at Lily, who had stopped drawing and was now watching him curiously. He thought about the overdue rent, the empty refrigerator. the nights he had lain awake wondering how he would make it through another month. And finally, he nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Sylvia gave him a small smile. "Don't waste it," she said. "I won't," he promised. As he walked back home that evening, Lily skipping beside him, Nathan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I hope." Nathan sat at the kitchen table that evening, the envelope still in front of him. He had counted the money twice, not out of disbelief but to let the reality settle in. $15,000. It felt unreal. For the first time in years, he had a chance to breathe. Lily was humming to herself as she played with an old stuffed rabbit on the floor. She had no idea of the weight that had been lifted off her father's shoulders. Nathan watched her, a mix of relief and determination settling in his chest. He wasn't going to waste this opportunity. The next morning, he made a plan. The first order of business was paying the overdue rent. He walked into the landlord's office and handed over the exact amount owed, plus the next 3 months in advance. The man raised an eyebrow in surprise, clearly not expecting Nathan to be able to pay. But Nathan didn't care about the look he received, he cared about stability for his daughter. With that taken care of, he went to the grocery store and bought a full cart of food. Fresh vegetables, meat, milk, and all the things he had been stretching too thin for too long. That night, he cooked a proper meal for the first time in weeks, and the way Lily's face lit up made it worth every penny. But Nathan knew this money wasn't just about survival. It was a stepping stone. He had to think beyond just the next few months. The next day, he sat down with a notebook and began writing out his goals. He had always wanted to have his own business, a handyman service that could grow into something bigger. He had more than enough experience, but starting something on his own had always felt out of reach. Now, with this unexpected blessing, he had the means to take the first step. He began by getting the necessary paperwork for a small business license. He researched what he needed to register his business properly and made sure every detail was taken care of. It was a slow process, but for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt like he was moving toward something lasting. Sylvia had been watching his progress quietly. She had a way of knowing things without asking, and when she saw him one afternoon filling out paperwork at his kitchen table, she merely nodded in approval. One evening, she invited him over for tea. Lily played in the yard while Nathan sat across from her, the warm evening air settling comfortably around them. "You've been busy," Sylvia said, stirring her tea slowly. Nathan nodded, trying to be smart about this. She sipped her drink and looked at him thoughtfully. "You have the skills, you just needed the opportunity." He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes." She smiled slightly. "That feeling will pass. Eventually, you'll realize you've built something real." Nathan considered her words. He had spent so long just trying to get by that the idea of actually building something felt foreign. But he wanted it. Not just for himself, but for Lily. Over the next few weeks, he put everything into getting his business off the ground. He used part of the money to buy better tools, printed business cards, and set up a simple website. He reached out to people he had worked with in the past, letting them know he was available for jobs. Word spread quickly. The quality of his work spoke for itself, and soon, calls started coming in. He took on small projects, at first fixing roofs, repairing porches, patching up drywall. Every job he completed led to another recommendation. One afternoon, as he was finishing up a job, his phone rang. It was a contractor he had worked with years ago, back when things were more stable. "I heard you're back in business," the man said. "I've got a big project coming up. Could use someone reliable." Nathan hesitated for only a moment before saying, "Tell me what you need." The project was bigger than anything he had taken on before, renovating several rental properties that had fallen into disrepair. It was steady work, something that could provide real stability. When he told Sylvia about it, she gave him an approving nod. "You're on your way," she said simply. Nathan didn't know what to say to that. He just knew that, for the first time in years, he felt like he had a future. Months passed, and his business continued to grow. He hired an extra pair of hands to help with the workload, and soon he had more work than he could handle on his own. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching Lily chase fireflies, Sylvia walked over. She looked at the sturdy fence he had built, then at him. "You built more than just a fence," she said. Nathan glanced at her, then back at his daughter. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think I did." Sylvia nodded, satisfied. "Good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light of the evening fade. Nathan had started this journey with nothing but a willingness to help. And in the end, that willingness had changed everything.